Welcome to the Center for Baptist Leadership podcast, hosted by William Wolfe. Our mission is to cultivate courageous and biblical Baptist leadership for the 21st century. We aim to revitalize the Southern Baptist Convention from within, defend it from those who seek its destruction, and serve as a better Baptist voice in the public square.
All right, folks, here we go. So there's been quite a bit of news coming out of the Southern Baptist Convention, or things related to the Southern Baptist Convention, in the last week. Yesterday, the good guys up in Moscow, Idaho, at CrossPolitic Studios, released a new mini documentary about the so-called abuse crisis in the Southern Baptist Convention. And for those who are familiar with a previous documentary that was released by Founders Ministry, but was produced by Chocolate Knox up there, By What Standard, which focused primarily on the critical race theory debacle in the Southern Baptist Convention, when the Southern Baptist Convention approved of critical race theory as a so-called analytical tool that Christians could or should use. This is sort of a follow-up to that. Instead of focusing on the critical race theory aspect, though, this is an after action of what's now been a 7-year-long fight over whether or not there was an abuse crisis in the Southern Baptist Convention, criminal cover-up of sexual abuse and things like that. And it's a very well-produced documentary. You can find it on their YouTube. You can find it on their X. You can find it anywhere you find things like this. But this is really important, and here's why. Because the Southern Baptist Convention got played again. It got played by bad actors who weren't really motivated by protecting victims, by making our churches a safer environment for everyone involved, by helping churches be better informed onto how to prevent abuse, but rather by people who had a political agenda to seize power in the Southern Baptist Convention, to undo certain aspects of the conservative resurgence, and to install their preferred leaders and individuals into places of power to lead us to the left. Some of the most notable names you'll recognize from that documentary are people like Rachel Den Hollander. And as every year goes by, we learn more and more about how her involvement with the sexual abuse task force and everything that came out of it was laden with conflicts of interest, that she was able to do things like even edit the guidepost report that came out, which was completely unethical and completely beyond the pale of what should have been allowed, which has now resulted in a variety of lawsuits that have come to the Southern Baptist Convention's doorstep, costing us over $10, $13, $15 million. We're not 100% sure what the total cost is now, at least 13, maybe more, in legal fees, because of the reckless nature of the allegations that were included in that report, which the top ones weren't fundamentally about any children who had been abused at churches, but arguably consensual relationships between consenting adults that were later put through this paradigm of the Me Too understanding of power dynamics and then labeled as abuse. So make sure to watch that, and our panel will be talking about that today. Additionally, Josh Powell, who is running for SBC president in Orlando, released a blog and a follow-up video giving us the reasons why he is running. And he gave us three main reasons. The first one was to strengthen confidence in our confession. The second one was to rebuild trust in our cooperation. And the third was to renew our focus on the Great Commission. What's particularly interesting, though, in his blog article on this, which you can find at the Baptist Courier, is that Josh essentially proposes that we do away with the current Credentials Committee process, which fundamentally has been in the spotlight in relation to how we are adjudicating churches in the SBC who have female pastors, or failing to adjudicate those churches and allowing them to stay in. And Josh is saying that we need to kick that back to the messengers, which that is certainly an interesting proposal. I'm not sure if that would result in us actually dealing with more of these churches, but that's what he is proposing. So those are sort of our top lines. There's more that could be said, but let me go ahead and bring in the guests that we have here today, including Jon Whitehead, Michael Clary, and David Schrock. Guys, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, William, glad to see you.
All right. So I don't know if you guys got a chance to watch the documentary yet or not from CrossPolitic, but let's react to that first. We'll go around the horn. John, David, and then Michael.
Yeah, no, as soon as it came out, people started texting me, have you seen this? It's really good. I think if you've been listening to us for a long time, you've probably heard a lot of this, the interesting format, comparing this to the takeover of the PCUSA, the Presbyterian mainline denomination. That was really good framing, but a really good summary of a lot of the issues we've been talking about here. And so a good place to direct people to understand what's going on.
Thanks, John. David?
Yeah, I think maybe a month or so ago, there were some people talking about some of the concerns that were the Southern Baptist Convention related to critical race theory, related to maybe some of the sex abuse, maybe more the critical race theory. And certainly this video brings that back out to the forefront. It's focusing on the sex abuse, but as you said, William, it's connected to the By What Standard that founders put out before. And I know the conversation that was had a month or so ago online was that these things are kind of dormant. We've passed them, but really they haven't gone away. They continue to be at the forefront of why it's been difficult to trust many of the leaders in the SBC. And as painful as it is to bring these things into the forefront, as difficult as it may be for many Southern Baptists to receive this video from Moscow, outside of our tribe, if you will, people need to watch it. They need to recognize what happened, how the SBC did get played, was misled by its own leaders. Many of those are not in the convention anymore. Some are, but it's certainly something that we need to come to grips with, to learn from, to repent of, and to not make the same mistakes again.
Thanks, David. Michael?
The documentary took an interesting turn at the end that I didn't expect, and that was to talk about the agency of women and how whenever you functionally deny the agency of women, you set yourself up for the sort of debacle that we had in the sex abuse scandal, where basically what was an adulterous affair, a consensual adulterous affair, was reframed to the convention and to the country as a sexual abuse, when actually the woman in that instance she had kind of an organic authority as the publisher of the man who committed adultery with her. But the cost of that was $13 million. And we'll get into this a little bit later about financial transparency and about how NAMB uses and spends money. $13 million, that would represent, a little less than 10% of NAMB's budget in any given year. And that represents churches that were not planted, resources that were not deployed for church planting and other tools that we need. And so the fact of denying the agency of women has real, tangible, identifiable costs. And I was really pleased and surprised that it took that turn at the end. And I thought it was extremely well done overall, the documentary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, guys. John, let me come back to you here, because I saw some of the reaction from the loudest and some, we could say, leading voices about abuse reform in the Southern Baptist Convention, right? Krista Brown, Tiffany Thigpen, Brett, I'm forgetting the guy's last name, Eric Costanzo, a current trustee at the ERLC, saying the only people who have been misled or played are the people who think it wasn't a real issue. And of course, it's a very sensitive subject, because we're not denying that there have been cases of abuse in Southern Baptist Convention churches. That's not really what's in question. The question was it a crisis, and was there a cover-up? And then the way that we handled this, did we actually do anything to make our Southern Baptist Convention churches safer for children, for, dealing with victims from this? And it just isn't clear that that's the case at all. So John, just sort of kind of tease that out for us here. Like, when we're sharing this documentary, when we're saying we've been played and, taken for a ride here by feminists, by Me Too ideology, it's not that we don't care about victims. We do. It's that everything we've done doesn't really help any victims.
Yeah, I think that was a helpful point in the documentary. One of their points was in terms of filling the empty seats. Once you've obtained a lot of folks exit, then you get to fill the empty seats with people in your faction. And certainly one of my biggest complaints, and I think others have joined in, is not so much that there were people that had firm beliefs on what we should do about abuse. that's fine. We're going to have those arguments. What I really objected to were people that maliciously, Machiavelli-like, used the sex abuse crisis to put themselves into power by promising, we're going to make big changes. We're going to do this thing. And those of us on the other side are saying, well, you're not going to be able to do that. There are rules in place that make that impractical. I said, no, just put us in place. We'll do it. And so you flush a generation of conservative leadership in the convention in order to put new people in charge. And then once they're in charge, they don't really do anything different. They come down and say, well, actually, those guys made the right decision, but we cared. And so you should keep us. And so the documentary, I think, raises the correct point. We still have a problem in that we have put people into place that were led and will continue to be led, but also are not doing anything different. So it was the perfect storm of spend lots of money, flush lots of good leadership, condemn lots of good people, and then set ourselves up in power, but then really do nothing about it. And so I saw Krista Brown saying, I didn't like the documentary, and you wouldn't expect her to, but she said, sometimes the guys that claim to be the good guys were as bad as any guys I disagreed with. And so in that sense, I agree with her that we still have a problem with current leaders that use that situation to make themselves look good by using other people's money that are still liable to be led down the wrong path. That's something the convention has to work out in how to replace and put good new leadership in.
Thanks, John. Rhett, welcome.
Glad to be here. Sorry to be late.
No, it's okay. We got an all-star panel here. It's like the Brady Bunch of the SBC reformers, small R reformers here. So let me kick this over to David, Michael, and Rhett. Rhett, we're talking about the CrossPolitic mini doc on how we've been played in the Southern Baptist Convention. And why does this still matter? And, I've been thinking about all these issues, and David, particularly the issues that you're addressing this month at Christ Overall with your SBC theme.
Yeah,
it's the same issues. We've been talking about them for years. It's the gross mismanagement of the so-called abuse crisis and what certain leaders did with that. It's lack of financial transparency. It's rogue entities. It's a broken trustee system. I mean, these are the same issues we've been talking about. Why does it matter today? Well, I think it matters today because we have to get the leaders who are going to resolve these things for us and resolve these things for us biblically and in a Baptist way. And so when you guys see this and you think of future leadership in the Southern Baptist Convention or what needs to change, David, Michael, Rhett, sort of like, what's your encouragement for Southern Baptist pastors as we look towards Orlando? Like, why do we need to keep bringing these issues up? And what does new leadership look like that will help us solve them in a productive and faithful manner?
Yeah, I think this is a conversation that we had with both Josh Powell as well as Willie Rice in the 2 interviews we've done with them. That was a question I posed to them. And I think there is a real need for kind of fresh leadership and leadership that's willing to look back and say, I was wrong. I was misled. I misled others. Talking to Willie about this, I mean, he had a real simple acronym, AFL, to admit, to fix, and to learn. And that's what's needed. But what sadly has often been the case are too many people who haven't admitted that they were wrong. And they may have tried to fix some things along the way, but if they're fixing without admitting, then they haven't learned anything. And I think that's one of the things that we're looking for. We're not looking for leaders who are perfect, but we are looking for leaders who are humble, who are willing to recognize the wrong that they have done. And I think this is one of the reasons why Willie is such a breath of fresh air, is because he recognized, oh, I was misled here. And he's really been able to kind of turn the corner in ways that others have not. For those who remain as kind of defending what was taking place there. And again, this is always the challenge in the SBC, is that the leaders who are at the front of the room or at the mics are people that we know. We've gone to seminary with them. We have longstanding relationship with them. But I think about one of those in Grant Gaines and the fact that he was standing there with Hannah Kate Williams and was certainly misled her as well. And there hasn't been any kind of public acknowledgement for that. And therefore, the trust factor just goes out the window. And we're looking for leaders who can be trusted. And I think all those who are having conversations about the SBC today recognize that trust has been lost, but I'm not sure they recognize what is necessary to regain that trust.
Well said, David. Thank you. Michael?
Well, you ask, like, why do we keep beating this drum? And I would just ask, why what is the cost of not continuing to beat the drum? And if we don't continue to beat the drum, then the status quo continues. And the status quo is what just cost us $13 million. We have a low trust convention where there's increasing numbers of people that are feeling like they're not heard. And seems like there's a mission drift in what we're doing. There are theological problems that have not been addressed. There's the issue of women pastors. There's the lack of financial transparency. And these are all interconnected. So if without financial transparency, then we are funding our own demise. We're giving money to something that actively seems to be working against our interests and the interest of the convention. We're Christians, there's forgiveness. If somebody says, hey, we screwed that up, there's forgiveness there. As Willie Rice, you mentioned him earlier, that by acknowledging that he didn't see something, we're like, okay, praise God. Like we're on the same page now. Now we can work together for reform. But there has not been any broad acknowledgement of the problems. And yet there is the continued appeals to continue giving money without opening the books so we know where that money is going. And that continues to contribute to our lack of trust. And so I'm happy to be a pebble in the shoe, as all five of us are. Just keep beating the drum and drawing attention to it until something happens that makes real change possible.
Thanks. Yeah, Rhett. So essentially, like, why does this documentary still important here in the year of our Lord 2026? We've been talking about this for 7 years. John's written about it ad nauseum. We've all talked about it, but it still matters. Why do you think that's the case, Rhett?
I think it still matters. I think it can be summed up in one word, which is accountability. So both David and Michael just mentioned trust there. And I think trust and accountability go together. And those are two things that are currently lacking in our convention. And the deficiencies of both trust and accountability is what I think is driving a lot of people to disengage with the SBC, to disengage with cooperative program giving, or even directed giving, or the missions offering giving. And so I think the documentary is important because it brings to a head in one particular issue that everybody had been focused on for a number of years in a very concrete way, the subject of accountability and the fact that there hasn't been any for that $13 million. There hasn't been any for the reputations that were disparaged. There hasn't been any for the things that were said that were not true, and they've not been corrected, or they've not been repented of, or anything of that nature. And so I think this matters because at the very forefront of renewal or reform, or whatever word you want to use, in the SBC is, are we going to be accountable for what we say? Are we going to be accountable for what we do? Are we going to be accountable for the money? Are we going to be accountable for our stewardship? Are we going to be accountable for the sacred task that's been entrusted to us? And thus far, the answer is we're going to try to get out of all the accountability that we can. And so that's why I think this matters. It's not just about that one issue, but it brings it to the forefront in that one concrete example that also can be applied in a number of different ways across our convention.
Yeah, and the lack of accountability continues to destroy people's lives. I mean, John and I have talked briefly about the Preston Garner case in Tennessee, but what's happening to Preston Garner is directly downstream of the way that crop of leaders handled the so-called abuse crisis. And that guy's life has been completely upended. Maybe, well, we won't say destroyed, but completely upended. And his name has been dragged through the mud with no recourse. And as John and I talked about on, I think, the second episode when we started doing these, it all came from an anonymous tip to the hotline set up by this new crop of leaders that from there on, no biblical standards of justice, no American standards of justice. And just the ball starts rolling because he was accused of being an abuser when he wasn't. And now he's in years of litigation about that. And so the lack of accountability continues to have real world consequences. But since we have this panel and this is, we're getting an update sort of on like Christ Overall's monthly theme on the SBC. David, tell us about the Christ Overall monthly theme, which all these guys are contributing to. And then we'll talk about Michael's article, Rhett's article, and John's article so far.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on to be able to talk about that. And certainly important subject that I know that CBL cares deeply about, and happy to be here to encourage that as well. So Christ Overall, with Steve Wellham, Brad Green, myself, Trent Hunter, and a few others, are all deeply invested in the Southern Baptist Convention, have gone to school there. At Southern Seminary, have certainly taught there. A number of different ways we're connected. So we want what is best for the SBC. We have been benefited by it. We want to encourage it. And so certainly our love for the SBC motivates every March addressing that. So we did that a couple years ago with Mike Law's amendment. We did that with Cooperation Confessions. And then last year we looked at the ERLC. And really over the last year, as we've been praying and thinking about what are the needs in the SBC, it is certainly, can the center hold? Can the cooperation that we care so deeply about continue to go forward for the next 100 years? So we celebrated last year 100 years of the Cooperative program, where finances are given for the purposes of missions and education, all of those things together. There's been great genius behind that. We want that to go forward, but it's not going to go forward with the fracturing that continues to take place and the deflating that continues to take place, if only looking at the finances. Not only the lack of giving to the CP, but also the loss of $13 million here most recently. So all of those things are vital. And so we recruited some of the best minds and pastors around who hopefully won't just be a pebble in the shoe, although that might be that, as Michael Clary mentioned, but certainly spurring our brothers on towards love and good deeds to think about important subjects related to all the things that we're talking about here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, really powerful work last year, particularly on the ERLC and on the law amendment. So I've pulled up the screen. Can you guys all see that there? At Christ Overall. So far we've got contributions from Mark Cobbinger, Brad Green, Michael Clary, Rhett, Tom Nettles, very good article there, Alex Kochman, and others. And you've also done a couple interviews. You've talked to Clint Presley. You've talked to Josh Powell as well, current president, a guy who's running for president. The Willie interview is not out yet, correct?
Yeah, that comes out next week.
Okay. And so, what, David, what would you say, sort of the temperature is, as you've talked to Clint, you've talked to Josh, and you talked to Willie, but it's not out yet. Who do you think is really sort of getting this right in terms of the posture we need to have?
Yeah, so I told both these guys, and I'd say this here as well. I mean, I'm most encouraged by the two men who are running more than any of the comparisons over the last number of years. I know Josh a long time. I think he's a good pastor. He pastored my wife for a long time. And I've gotten to know Willie, and certainly thankful for his stand in the convention. One of the key questions that I wanted to ask them, and if you watch both of the interviews, listen to both the interviews, you'll hear similar questions to both of them, because what we wanted to do is kind of give a side-by-side comparison of where they're coming from. And one of the questions had to do with how great is the concern in the SBC, especially for trust and the needs that are there. And I do think that Willie has a greater finger on the pulse of the concerns in the SBC. So I think Josh recognizes that there are trust factors that are there, but I think Willie just sees it a little bit more clearly. Even his website that he's put together, baptistrenewal.us, recognizes these 7 pillars where he's trying to bring about change that is there. And for that reason, I think he sees the concerns that are there. He's going and talking to pastors across the country. And as he's doing that, he's hearing the anecdotes, the stories of just distrust that is going on, the discouragement that faithful, regular pastors have with those who are leading the convention. And I think he wants to see change in a way that is greater than what Josh is doing.
Great. Speaking of that sort of maybe space, the space that exists between discouraged, regular, faithful pastors and maybe some of the guys at different levels of participation in SBC. Let me put you all on the spot and turn it over to all of you here. Dean and Sarah, who, some of us might be friends with. I certainly know Dean. He had a post the other week where he essentially said, he was at the IMB and everything is great. When you visit the seminaries, when you go to the IMB, to the missionary commissioning ceremonies, everything is great. And I responded pretty, I wouldn't say forcefully, but pretty clearly saying I'm not surprised if you're being flown to the missionary commissioning ceremonies and you're a big part of the Send network. You're sort of a favored son in the SBC, that everything seems great to you, but that's not everybody's experience. I don't think that's most people's experience. So Michael, Rhett, John, we'll go to you guys there. So do you see that divide between the folks who think, as I've been saying, Lego movie, hashtag everything is awesome, and the people on the ground who think maybe actually things are not so great? Go Michael, Rhett, and then John.
Anecdotally, I can say, yes, there's a trust problem. And the thing is, like, when you're dealing in anecdotes, you're not dealing with, a representative sample of the convention. You're dealing with somebody's perspective. So if you go to a NAMB meeting or an IMB meeting, you're going to get their press release version of what's happening there. And you'll come away with the emotional impression, okay, they're doing a good job. And, that means they're doing what they intended to do, which is to sell people on the value of the ministry they're doing. I don't fault them for that, but you cannot take that as this is the temperature of the convention. It's a big convention, and there's a lot of churches, a lot of perspectives, and what you're going to hear at IMB headquarters is not what it is at the street level, where a lot of churches are. And so, from my experience, I know just my trust has been broken with the convention. Having gone to the convention, having seen the way business operates, having talked to people there, having talked to pastors locally that I'm friends with, emails and texts and direct messages and stuff I see on X, I'm like, there is a significant number of people that don't have trust. And it seems as though the people that are most trusting are those that may not be up to speed on some of the particulars of why those of us are concerned. And that's why we need to talk about it so we can get the word out. But I'm certainly seeing a disparity and asymmetry of trust across the board. And it does seem as though the distrusting, side of the equation is a growing proportion of the convention. And we keep talking, we can't be ignored forever.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a convention as big as ours, with as many churches and as many people, you're going to get a wild disparity of views, I believe, on how things are. But I'll mention just two. Michael's talking anecdotally. I'll mention two recent conversations that I had. One is with a local church pastor who is sending messengers for, I think, the first time in a long time from their church. And they are greatly concerned. They trust is a big factor for this church, and so they want to be involved. But they're not seeing the same things that Dean is seeing. And I assume that if you go to the IMB's home office, you're going to see some really good things. You go to an IMB commissioning, that makes sense to me. That seems really great, and it is. We're sending missionaries to the field. That's what we want to do. But I also had a recent exchange with one of our field missionaries, who pointed out that since 2020, the number of missionaries that we have on the field has declined. Not a whole lot, maybe about 39, but it has declined. At the same time, the number at the home office has gone up. Salary at the home office has increased. But salary and benefits for field personnel has not kept up with the same percentage. Contributions to retirement at the home office are, I think, like 3 times as much as they are for field personnel. And even though they're retiring to the same country. And so this is stuff that is actually in the book of reports of the annuals, in the annual reporting. But it's having an effect on our field personnel. So go to the home office and go to a commissioning, and things are going to seem really great. But go to a certain place on the field, and you're going to find some discontent. And both of those things can be true, because I think the sending of new missionaries is awesome. We do want to do that. But we also need to take into consideration real numbers, real decisions, real people, real lives that are being affected by all of this, and take that, into the whole package as well. And so I would reject a gloss on everything that says everything is great. You people who have trust issues are just malcontents and cranks. And I would also reject kind of a only doom and gloom about the SBC as well. There are things, and if you're going to find what you go looking for. And so we ought to go looking for things that are good, but we ought to go looking for the things that we can fix as well.
Thanks. John, reactions to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, heaven forbid that missionary sending ever become bad enough that we all disagreed with it, right?
Amen.
And so the reason we do what we do and we say what we say is that we never want that to become a shame to the convention. You look at other denominations when people let go of the rope and the conservatives leave and go try something new. then that denomination tends toward liberalism. And not only do the mission programs become messed up, some denominations say missionism is missionary is colonialism, and so we're just getting rid of missions altogether. So at the point there was ever a fight about our missionary appointments, then the thing is over. That should be the last place Baptists ever have a disagreement about what's going on, because hopefully that remains something good we all agree on. It's kind of like saying, well, we had a good Christmas. How can you say there's problems in this family? Well, yeah, we want that to be a good event. We want to have that family time, and we all love the family time. And if that ever becomes a fight, then things are really bad. The reason we're saying what we're saying, and Josh Powell retweeted Dean and said something about, well, sometimes complaints reveal a heart of discontent. I said, the reason I talk about what I talk about is not discontent. I want that to remain something we all agree on. But I just said, my kids aren't happy when I have to move money out of vacation fund into foundation repair. But I'm not doing that because I hate the kids, or I want to have a bad family life, or I don't appreciate the family. It's because I got to take care of the thing that houses the family. And so what we're seeing, whatever we say about the goodness of those events, the facts are people are giving less and people are leaving our churches for other places. So numbers are down, people are voting with their feet, and I hope that fight never breaks out at IMB commissioning, that there's reason to fight. That should be something we all maintain as something we all look forward to. We're talking about things so that, except the Lord build the house, right? We want to make sure the foundations remain strong to support the very things we all agree on.
Yeah, well said, John. So the foundations, obviously, the Southern Baptist Convention is the Cooperative program for the last 100 years. That, or we could say the foundation is our trustee system. The Cooperative program is what powers it. So, Rhett, let's go to you because you're going to have to go here before anybody else. You gave an update on financial transparency in the Southern Baptist Convention at Christ Overall. Article titled, "Whoever holds the purse holds the strings, the financial plan that could end the SBC." You warn that the Southern Baptist Convention is on the verge of a radical transformation and that the denomination as we've known it, loved it, served it, and funded it may not exist in recognizable form in a generation. Okay, Chicken Little, what's going on?
So last year, we passed a new business and financial plan, and that plan was brought forth by the executive committee in response to a motion that I made in New Orleans in 2023 asking for 990 level financial disclosure. They took a year, the ensuing year, to discuss it, and they came back at the 24 annual meeting and said, we're not going to vote on that, but we'll bring a plan. We'll get together with the entities and executive committee, and we'll bring a plan to the 25 convention in Dallas to enhance transparency. That was the phrase they used. And so they brought that plan. I think they announced it last February and brought it to the convention in Dallas, which was a brand new financial plan. It was branded as a streamlined plan. But it was a radical transformation from the previous business and financial plan. It did not include any enhanced transparency. There was no new, there's no 990 level type of disclosure. Rather, what's new is there's an accountability letter where the entity head or representative delegate signs off on a bunch of questions. But at the same time, it also removes a lot of messenger rights. So messengers used to have the right to ask and receive certain financial information, including salary structures, and that is no longer there. Messengers used to have to approve any outside funding, and then they would receive a report about outside funding. Both of those requirements have been removed, which I think is probably the biggest change in the business and financial plan. And I think that's what I was really getting at in this article, which is now they can go raise money from anywhere. And if we learned anything from back in the early 90s with the exodus of Baptist institutions from state conventions, I'm thinking of Furman University just down the road from me, is once the money is coming from somewhere else, then the argument is made, well, you shouldn't appoint all the trustees since you don't give all the money. Then whoever is giving the money, that is who is having more influence on your trustees. And that's how we lost a lot of state Baptist institutions. And nobody knows the future if that's going to happen here with our national entities, but it does create the conditions where that's possible. It also creates the conditions where we're receiving a lot of non-Baptist money. Now, maybe that's just from other evangelicals, Baptistic evangelicals, but we've seen, as Megan Basham reported in Shepherds for Sale, we've seen where leftist political organizations also like to give and try to use their influence through money in the Southern Baptist Convention. And so because of we don't have to approve it anymore and we don't receive a report on it anymore, we're at the cusp of what could be a pretty big transformation of our convention away from our Baptist convictions, from our conservative theology, and our prioritization of church planting missions, among unreached peoples and places around the world. And we're losing the ability to hold entities accountable because of this. And so that's the warning that I was trying to issue. I don't want to paint the blackest of pictures, but it's at least possible. And so I think we need to consider that. The good news is we can still reverse that. That new business and financial plan is amendable, but it's going to take some messenger will to do it. And what I saw last year at the convention is that will was not there. People just wanted to raise the ballot.
Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. You have a great line in here where you say financial accountability and doctrinal accountability are two sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that just is demonstrably the case, particularly for the entire endeavors of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah.
We pool money together to do more than we could do alone. But the point of pooling that money from these faithful Baptist churches is that we're doing Baptist things with them, conservative, theological, biblically sound Baptist things.
Yeah.
And by opening up that floodgate of external money, we really lose. We sort of, as John said, we let go of the rope on holding the accountability there. So, Rhett, would you say, you spent like about 3 years trying to get a better system for us? Can we get more financial transparency? Can we get more accountability? And ultimately, you were stonewalled at every turn by the financial subcommittee, by the broader executive committee. They rewrite the business and financial plan, not to enhance transparency, but to obscure it. I mean, it really is not trying to cast aspersions, but it's like when the left, says we're doing, it's the euphemistic use of things like, healthcare for women when they mean abortion. It's like we're enhancing transparency. Actually, we're limiting it. Now you can't even get some of the information you used to get. Now they can go raise funds where they couldn't raise it before. Have you pivoted a little away from trying to fix things to just warn us now how bad it's going to get?
No, I don't mean to do that. I think there's still some levers we could pull. At any point in time, messengers could vote to amend that business and financial plan. I don't know that the messengers are necessarily ready to do that in Orlando. What messengers can do is elect a president who understands that increased transparency and accountability is really key to restoring trust. I think that's probably a better first step. Do I think we should amend the business and financial plan? Yes. Do I think if I got up and made the same 990 motion for the fourth year in a row that it's going to just overwhelmingly succeed this time? Probably not. And so we need to take maybe some smaller steps. I think so. Willie Rice has mentioned or suggested the possibility of a denominational accountability task force. I can't remember exactly what he called it, but something of that nature. I think something like that could be helpful in order to educate messengers at a level that just a regular messenger. I worked really hard last year to educate messengers. There's only so much you can do. CBL put out a lot of information. Christ Overall put out some articles on it as well, but there's only so much. But I think something with the heft of a denominational group that could really help. And so I think those are some next steps that we could take that would be short of changing our business and financial plan and governing documents, but could set conditions to be more constructive, more transparent, more accountable in the future. And so, no, I don't want to just opine from the sidelines about how bad things could get, but I do want to say these are the stakes, and these are some next steps that we can do. And if I could, you highlighted the doctrinal accountability, or the doctrinal side that goes with the financial accountability side. And I just want to highlight that because there does seem to be there's some among us that really care about the doctrinal side, particularly as it relates to the law amendment. And they will talk about the importance of that, and rightly so, but are absolutely silent on the transparency and financial accountability side of things. And I just want us to see that those two things go together. And historically, when we've given up on the financial accountability, we have lost on the doctrinal side. And it's not because necessarily our churches went liberal, but we lost control of the institutions. And so I want us to remain vigilant so that we don't lose control of the institutions.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thank you for your work on it. Michael, David, John, any reactions from our panel here in terms of what Rhett is continuing to champion, what he's warning about, the state of financial transparency in the SBC? Obviously there's been some conversation about that more broadly. John and I weighed in on a conversation Josh Powell had with the Baptist Review guys recently in our last episode, as David's sons maybe suggested or didn't suggest, depending on how you read him, that we're just uneducated. We just can't find the information. Maybe that's not really the case. David, Michael, John, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, to broaden one point that Rhett made, I do think we have the challenge of getting the information out. Michael, you made this point earlier of just, we're going to continue to speak until someone begins to hear. I do think that many that come to the convention, they're certainly capable of learning those things. So I would not agree with the way that David Sons is thinking about that. But many of them are not kind of dialed into all the things that are there to be able to be known. And so certainly the institutional and the entity-wide organizations and communications are larger than what we're doing. And that's why we're having podcasts like this, to be able to educate people about these things. But that's one of the challenges, right? And so we get, Brett, as you're talking about, the way that some are deeply concerned about the law amendment, and that really got a lot of the attention there. And some should be then at the same time caring for financial transparency and financial accountability. And there doesn't seem to be that, because I think in part, they haven't taken the time to listen. And when they do, they begin to see both historically and in the present why this matters so much. And so we still have the challenge of communicating these things, which to anyone who's listening to this or reading Christ Overall or reading some of the things at CBL, share it with others so that others can see these important details as well.
Thanks, David. Michael?
I don't have anything new to add. It was all great.
Okay. John?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Rhett has put his finger on exactly the problem of, if we don't hold the rope in this situation, it's not just that we would lose financial accountability. It's that we start to give up the entities and really have that shift from this is church work that's being done for churches to churches are consumers of a product offered by these parachurch groups. And those are just two very different models. That's never been the Baptist model. And if we want that to be the SBC in the future, then messengers have to care about those things.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's fascinating to me, again, just so many of these issues. It's like there are real problems that everyone can see, and there are solutions that nobody wants to touch, right? And so like Willie Rice recently posted about sort of the fall off in the cooperative program giving from I think like 2007 to 2008 to 2023 and 2024. And it's a massive drop off. When adjusted for inflation, it's even more. And so, again, we've talked about this. If the green line was going up, then maybe Rhett's wasting his time, right? But like the problem is so bad, it's so obvious that, we got a whole spiel from the executive committee last September about designated giving. We have the 30 largest churches in the SBC having secretive off the books meetings with, major entities about what a post-cooperative program future might look like. It just, it seems like there is a real problem that everybody recognizes. Even the guys who don't like Rhett's proposal recognizes we have a problem. and their solutions are anything but what would actually fix the issue. Why do you guys think that is? Or Rhett, why do you think that is?
I'm hesitant to talk too much about motivations that I don't know about. I wonder, there's a lot of money out there. And so the going after the outside giving is really tempting. I think they see the handwriting on the wall in some ways with the Cooperative program and just the drastic decline. I think that inflation adjusted number, if I remember right, something like $350 million difference. Again, inflation adjusted, 100 or so million real dollars from the peak of the Cooperative program in 07 and 08 until this past year. And so it makes sense that people are trying to figure out what to do next. Why we don't want to just do the things that would restore trust. I wonder, again, there's no way to know, but bigger is always better. Or so we think. And so, wanting to maybe be bigger than we could be otherwise. I don't want to guess too much there, but I think no matter what the motivations are, what we see is it doesn't seem like our current leadership is committed to doing what we came together to do in the way that we came together to do it. They do seem bent on transforming how we go about our cooperation together. And if that means, a good number of us not cooperating anymore, then that's a price that they're willing to pay because they can find that they can make up that money elsewhere. My contention would be, one, is not necessarily with those that share our Southern Baptist convictions and theology, and that's what I worry about.
Yeah.
On that note, I am going to have to run. I apologize, but I do have a meeting. But God bless all of you. Y'all doing fantastic work. CBL, Christ overall, all of you guys. Thanks for letting me join in for a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Rhett. Maybe, I don't know, David can see the metrics. Maybe one of the most read or most notable articles so far in Christ Overall's monthly theme on the Southern Baptist Convention has been yours about NAMB. And yours is titled More Money Than Men, the NAMB Church Planting Problem. So, Michael, this is a very interesting thesis, which you're essentially arguing, and I'm glad to have John here so we can kick this around. Does NAMB have more money than they can use, or are they out of money, and that's why they're looking elsewhere? Essentially, you argue that the current sort of incentive structure at the North American Missions Board is that they have tons of money to throw at church planting and more money than qualified men. You detail quite a few sad, some even tragic examples of, failed NAMB church planters. Of course, that's always going to happen. It's not like anything's going to be perfect, right? That's not what you're suggesting. But yeah, just walk us through this because you're a former NAMB church planter. You're an insightful, I feel like, critic and commentator of things at sort of a system level in the Southern Baptist Convention. So how did you come to this thesis, more money than men? And what does it mean and how do we fix it?
It was two isolated observations that came together whenever David asked me to write a piece for Christ Overall. There's one part of the piece where I just observed how I've personally seen money being spent in NAMB. And, when it's blue skies and green pastures, praise God, we've got money to spend and we can really bless people, bless church planters, give them gifts, make sure they know that they're loved and supported 100%. So there's no fault there. There was a degree of what you might consider luxury that was evident in the way some of the money was spent, but Southern Baptists are generous people. And so, I think I would imagine at least the four of us here would like, hey, we want our pastors to be well taken care of in our churches. So there's no fault there. And then alongside that, I was also noticing how, there's an awful lot of church plants that are a dumpster fire. Some of them are successful in the worst way. So they successfully teach heterodox doctrine. They're successful at promoting sin and other kind of sinful ideologies that the rank and file Southern Baptist would oppose. Or on the other side, they don't make it. We have a tolerance for a degree of failure. That's just part of the the success failure assessment that we do. So we can expect that we can absorb some of those. But man, there's been a bunch of them. And from my personal observation, I was like, I've not seen many churches that are 15 years in since I started, healthy, strong, thriving Southern Baptist churches. And what I gave you was just a small sample of all the church planting horror stories that I'm aware of. And so I was like, okay, these two are connected because church plants, there's no congregation yet. That's the whole point. So there's no way to fund them. That's why they rely on Southern Baptist dollars to fund them. And Southern Baptists have a lot of dollars to spend. We're the biggest church planting organization in the world. Unless somebody can correct my data on that, I believe we're the largest. We have a massive war chest, and we have a mandate from the convention to plant churches. So that creates an incentive structure to prioritize volume over quality. And whenever you do that, you've got people that they'll find the money. They'll realize, hey, I hear there's money over here. Let's go get some of it. And they'll go get it because there's money to be had. You can't really blame people that respond to the incentives that are provided. But what that leads to is carnage. And as a pastor, that's what really rips my heart out, is like, I have seen firsthand how people's lives are affected. People who their faith is shaken to the core. They're hanging by a thread spiritually because they followed a pastor that was funded by NAMB, that has the credibility that the Southern Baptist Convention provides by being behind it. And so they're like, hey, this is a church I can trust. I trust the Southern Baptist Convention. I can go to this NAMB church plant. I've heard of NAMB. I've heard of Send North America. And they go to that church and the wheels come off. There's this massive scandal that could have been prevented if there was a tighter assessment. And the incentives, and this is not to say that people did this deliberately, but I'm just saying the incentives kind of dictate policy in many cases. And the incentives were, well, let's give the guy money, and we got to break a few eggs to make omelets. They won't all pan out, but we hope that on the whole, that the majority or a significant number will succeed, and we can absorb a few casualties of war. In principle, I can live with that logic, knowing that when you're dealing with things at scale, that's the reality on the ground. But what I've observed is there have been far more casualties than I think we want to admit, and far more casualties than I think most Southern Baptists would be comfortable with, knowing that their church planting dollars, cooperative program dollars went to fund. And so I see a system that is in need of reform. And so like one of the, there's a lot that I said in the piece, but where I sort of landed the plane is there's two convictions that I think we could consider going forward. One is to tighten our assessments to where assessment functions as a tighter filter to where we're planting fewer churches, but better churches. And then on the other side of things, we want to see a greater accountability and full transparency in where the current money is being spent. I'll say one more thing about that. Whenever you've got church planting carnage, you've got pastor burnout, you've got scandal, you've got churches that are hurting, then those churches are on life support, they're in hospice care, and they need additional resources to come to their assistance. And NAMB, because they're already invested in it, they want to see those things through. And so now it's like, well, we need more coaching, we need more training, we need more soul care, we need mobilizers and catalyzers, and we need a variety of other jobs. And so we're going to hire more people to come and be tasked with fixing that problem. And so basically we create the monster, and then we hire ourselves to kill the monster. And that is what I see happening in the way that we're currently configured with the way NAMB works.
Yeah, well said, Michael. I mean, it's a very insightful piece. And again, just sort of your main conclusions there are from the article, NAMB should set a high standard for church planters and refuse to deviate from it. You say, in your view, it is time to reevaluate the, quote, more churches mantra in favor of fewer and better approach. And then second, financial transparency is absolutely essential. An institution operating on $147 million of cooperative giving owes the churches that fund it a full accounting of where that money goes. You also mentioned the Vance Pittman example in here, which I think is like very instructive. NAMB employs a number of people with ambiguous job titles, such as mobilizer or strategist. which I don't think you can find in the New Testament anywhere, ostensibly to provide ground support for church planters. And obviously, Vance Pittman has moved into this national mobilizer contract role to do preaching, coaching, and consulting ministry. I think that's just a really good example of what you're talking about here. So, I mean, I think they're great examples. Michael, John, David, feel free to chime in. But as I've approached thinking through how to reform the Southern Baptist Convention so it's more healthy, more biblical, more faithful, to me, NAMB really is sort of like the last boss to deal with. We gotta speed run some of the smaller bosses along the video game trajectory here before we can deal with NAMB. I mean, what are the chances here? What would it look like to get NAMB to focus on fewer and better and give us more financial transparency? Because they seem incredibly resistant to these suggestions and possible changes.
I'll make one quick comment and then yield to the other guys. I got a email from somebody who read the piece, and he was friendly and favorable towards the things I had to write, but he wanted to give me his own experience from the ground as somebody who works in an official capacity. And he says, hey, our church planning assessments are very tight, very rigorous and thorough. We turn down a lot of guys, and we're seeing great fruit. And in fact, we need more resources to fund the churches that we could potentially plant. And I was like, wonderful. Praise the Lord for that. And that is similar to the problem that we addressed earlier, where just because I like the way you said it, John. It's like, we had a great time at Christmas, so the family's great. And I'm like, well, it might be Christmas in your particular association, but that does not mean the family itself is in great shape on the whole. So I say, if anybody's listening to this or watching this podcast, you're thinking like, hey, I know in my association, we're planting churches out the wazoo and things are great and they're healthy and thriving and solid. Awesome. Don't take your particular, your one perspective as representative of the whole. And as best we can, we want to assess what's happening on the whole. And there was one graphic that did not make it into the final piece at Christ Overall, but it was sent to me by the people at Christ Overall. And I think if I can share my screen here, I'll see if I can. Well, I don't know if I can do it that way. I'll hold up my iPad and we'll do it old school.
Okay. Great.
But this graphic, if you see the blue lines, or the blue bars, those are churches planted, and you could see there's a downward trend. And then the red line that cuts through them, those are church planting expenditures that, up and down, but they trend up. And so that highlights the problem. And now we're underwater. And so I think John probably has some things to say about this, to where the current state of things financially with NAMB is that we're underwater financially. That hasn't always been the case, because I think the party ended and the money ran out. And now, the bartender's asking for the tab and we don't have enough money to pay it.
Yeah. So John, David, I mean, what were your thoughts on Michael's piece? And tell our listeners, this is a chance where we share some behind the scenes information with people if we can, like, what's the reaction been? What have you guys heard? What do you think of Michael's argument here?
So I think it stresses the point again, where it highlights things that I just don't know of what is going on with the North American Mission Board. And I'm not sure that I'm supposed to know, right? When you have these mobilizers, when you have these different positions throughout, it's like, what are they doing exactly there? This is where I think having trustees, and John, you'll get to this when you talk about just kind of trustee reform. I am curious what the connection is between the trustees and NAMB. And so maybe there's a great connection, but I don't know what that is. And it seems as though there needs to be some oversight of what is taking place there, especially just to hear the heartbreaking stories of church planters who seem to just be failing more than they should be. I mean, this ties into concerns that I have had with regards to just even the seminaries and the kind of students that are being produced there. I'm not sure what kind of quality control we actually have in our seminaries. It's a whole different subject. It's what I preached on when I was at Michael's church last year. But there's a connection between the kind of men that are being trained at the seminaries and then coming into the system for church planting. And it just seems that the quality and the quality control is something we need to look at. But again, that's probably an issue for another day.
Okay,
Yeah.
John.
Yeah. So I resonated with Michael's examples of churches that clearly had men and funding, and they just weren't ready for prime time. Although, as we've discussed elsewhere, the question is, maybe has NAMB invested in advisors and vice presidents and real estate and all the accoutrements in a way that now they don't have the cash flow. So has there been, in essence, overinvestment in some ways, even as we have a steady stream of young men that maybe aren't as qualified? Um, and so all of that speaks to what we've been talking about transparency, right? How is it I, as a local church with a God-given duty to plant churches and to spread the gospel, and so I'm spending my missionary money this way, how is it I know it is accomplishing the purpose I want it to accomplish? And we've really just got lots of anecdotes and vague numbers. There's a list of numbers there about churches planted. I understand some of those are not funded, and so uh, you know, query what do these numbers look like, and then the number of missionaries doesn't appear to match up with those churches, and so there's just real vagueness about what is the plan, what is the system, what is the metrics. I mean, I guess to speak in favor of Ed Stetzer, which is always dangerous in a room like this, I know there's been 10 years, 20 years of efforts to have assessment programs that are supposed to produce survivable churches. But I think when we look around, when we think about what a healthy church looks like, and we have lots of agreement in this room about healthy ecclesiology, uh, I don't see those churches rising up. I see the failures. I hear occasional good stories. I really like what NAMB does with replanting. I think that's a good focus in some ways. Um, uh, but I don't see Baptist Baptist convictional churches, convictional pastors, healthy churches. I don't see that being the main output. If we think about trends in churches right now, it is they're either going Pentecostal or non-denominational. That area is growing, or amongst Southern Baptists, um, various permutations of multi-site, multi-campus, multi-video, multi-screen churches. That appears to be growing in amongst the Southern Baptist world. That's the output we have. I don't see the next Adrian Rogers growing up. I don't see the next, pick your leader of the 1990s. So, are we reproducing? Are we investing in something that's not like us but appears successful under the metrics that we've all developed? I don't know, but it is an area of concern, and I appreciate folks like Michael who kind of have hands-on, eyes-on experience with what's happening, and when they raise concerns, then that helps the rest of us kind of develop a model of what's going on.
Well, if I can add something else, I think something that's illustrative of just the lack of assurance of what NAMB is producing, we wouldn't have this massive organization called Pillar planting churches in the SBC if NAMB was kind of producing something that was kind of verifiable or had a healthy ecclesiology. We wouldn't have a ministry called Acme that was kind of establishing 9 Marks churches in America and beyond, unless there were some questions that are going on there. I don't know what the future looks like for church planting in the Southern Baptist Convention. Maybe it will be, a new and improved NAMB, or maybe it will be smaller groups like Pillar that kind of become, a certain kind of church plant that is there that kind of everyone knows what those ecclesiological commitments are. But again, if NAMB was kind of reproducing the Adrian Rogers type, and there's something completely different to think about that. But if it was producing kind of an understandable or verifiable ministry, you wouldn't have other ministries that are kind of cropping up within the SBC.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I think about regularly, is that many individuals who are committed to essentially historic Baptist ecclesiology and New Testament, like church planning models, are taking their business elsewhere, as you said, or these organizations wouldn't exist. So Michael, back to you before you drop. I mean, what do you think is, you mentioned obviously financial transparency, fewer and better. You shared some of the anecdotes of like, well, maybe not here. It's going well here. If you were the CEO of NAMB though, are those the first two things you would do? You like open the books, reevaluate the assessment program. Anything else you want to recommend to them or to our listeners? You mentioned like, I'm not saying stop giving to NAMB, though I do wonder if that's something that, we should consider. Like, is the Annie Armstrong offering really the best use of the funds coming out of these local churches? I mean, the envelopes end up in the pews and people stuff them and they get $70 million a year from it. At what point do we need to put pressure on the system in such a way that it changes?
Yeah, I'm in no position to advocate for an expenditure policy at the church level. I think, NAMB is doing good work. There are good churches that are out there that need support. And so I wouldn't want to abandon them, despite the problems that we're seeing at the the meta level. So if I were the boss at NAMB, I think John Harris asked me the same question on his podcast the other day, and the answer that I gave him is that if I were the boss of NAMB, I would start with, we have to deal with reality. What is the reality that we face? And the pom poms and the ticker tape parade, church planting gold rush of 30 years ago, 20 years ago, is that sustainable? And do we have the human resources to sustain this? Like John, you said something that I think is a haunting line, honestly, which is, I don't see the next Adrian Rogers out there. That if that's true, then that's a problem, and we've got to deal with it honestly. Are our churches producing the caliber of men that our seminaries can then train and that NAMB can then assess? And if not, then it doesn't matter if you've got $1 billion. It doesn't matter how much money you've got in the bank account. Money doesn't buy calling, gifting, character. You can't buy those things. God produces those things. And so we have to really deal honestly with the reality. What kind of men are our churches producing? And are these the caliber of men that can be trusted with the church planting mantle going forward? And I had one other quick thought. Church planting tends to be a young man's game. And so your typical church planter is going to be maybe early 30s or below. There could be outliers, but that's typically the case. So that means your average church planter right now was probably born somewhere around 1996. What has happened in our culture in the last 30 years and what has happened to that generation of young people? Adrian Rogers was brought up in a wholly different era when Christianity was ascendant and the Southern Baptist Convention was flexing its muscles and it was strong and mighty and powerful, and we were doing great work around the world. And those days are gone because our culture around us has started to crumble, and that has added additional pressure to where that sort of man has more obstacles and roadblocks to overcome to emerge. We have to deal honestly with that. And so at the end of the day, there's a spiritual problem. We have to trust God and really seek the Lord to show us what is the way forward. I don't know that I could prescribe it, but I could at least say we have to deal honestly with where the current reality before we can just start making sweeping changes.
Yeah, in terms of meta stories, it feels like obviously we came to the end of maybe the Rogers megachurch era, right, in the 80s and 90s. And then the next big development was a Tim Kellerite urban ministry vision. And it feels like we've really probably overinvested and over-indexed to that working. And we're just at the end of that story. We've followed the path long enough that our friends, Aaron Wren and others have shown us the criticisms that, there are things to like and appreciate about Tim Keller. You couldn't put Tim Keller in a box and reproduce him on a Xerox machine and just have that work. And yet that seems to probably have been the model. And so we're at a point, again, an inflection point, where I know folks like us hope that the next model is a return to healthy ecclesiology. And so if there is a coalition in the convention world to have the Southern Baptist Convention be a healthy thing. It is that coalition that wants to return and reproduce healthy churches. And that's a lot of the reason we're all talking.
Amen.
Yeah. Well said, John. Michael, thanks for joining us. I hope you continue to get good feedback from your article and your work, and we'll have you back on to talk about some other things, I'm sure, before we get to Orlando and June.
Thanks, William. Appreciate you having me on, brother.
Yeah. David and John. Well, Michael, you don't have to leave. I mean, I'm just trying to be. I can't remember if you had a hard stop.
I feel so unwanted.
No. Okay, so sorry. I thought you had to go. I'm managing the stream as we all go here. John, we're gonna talk about John. Yeah, I'm gonna put you back on every week. I put John on the hook, and I put him on the hook again. We're gonna have to do a whole nother conversation on. Oh, there goes Michael. Oh well, I insulted him. I'm just trying to give him his day back.
He had a meeting. He had to leave.
Yeah, no. The last thing I want to talk about with you two in particular, though, and John, we'll do your trustee article another time. Yeah, we will.
That's why I said put me at the end.
Yeah. Well, but actually, what I want, and I didn't want to put Michael on the hook for this too, which is just like I want to just let's give like 5-10 minutes here on Willie Rice and Josh Powell in relation to all this, because this is kind of the theme we're really trying to hammer in these weekly conversations. Is we have a choice to make when we come to Orlando, and how are we seeing these guys interact with these different issues that are being brought up, being put forward in the SBC. And so the one thing I wanted to ask about is, like, as you guys see, particularly, what Josh said in terms of like the proposal to get rid of our credentials committee, that I just wanted to get your take on that, right? So the current credentials committee process that was instituted, I guess, in around 2019, in relation to, the abuse crisis, right? I guess it's a sort of a product of that, but was also given the authority to weigh in on other issues too. It's stacked with people from, J.D. Greer and Bart Barber era appointments. What do you guys think about that? Is Josh's proposal to essentially undo the credentials committee as we currently know it and just push everything back to the messengers every year, particularly in light of how many churches we have with female pastors? Is it viable? Is it sort of a too clever by half escape hatch on this issue? What do you guys think about it?
So this is a procedural question. So when I have procedural questions, I default to Jon Whitehead. So you should go first, brother.
Well, I guess I understand how it would help those that are opposed to the law amendment. I understand how it would help those that are opposed to excluding churches with women pastors, who would like to go back to a world in which there was, churches didn't discipline anybody and neither do conventions. So I understand how it helps those positions. I think if you're a moderate to liberal person inside the SBC, you say, well, look, if the best thing we could do is force them to take each of these churches. If we think, according to the article that David ran a few years ago, there's maybe 1,500, 1,200 churches that may have some form of woman pastor. So let's force the messengers to take each of those to the floor, and we'll have a little debate, and we'll raise exceptions and say this one's different than the other. And maybe we'll sneak one or two past the convention, and then that establishes an exception. And then that will, give us some more room inside the convention to maintain this practice. And so I understand how it helps them, that view. I don't understand how it helps conservatives who say they want to be focused on doctrinal unity. Somebody asked me, was it a mistake to have a standing credentials committee? I said, well, look, Baptists have been their own standing credentials committee for a long time. It's not that it will change Baptists raising concerns. The goal of making the committee a standing committee was to provide a way where we didn't have to have a floor fight on obvious stuff. And the problem now is, even with a committee, we appear to be set to have a floor fight on obvious stuff. And that's not a step forward. And I don't think it'd be a step forward to say, well, then okay, everything's on the floor. Let's get rid of the committee and then put everything on the floor. if it's obvious, if the majority has repeatedly said these are the rules we want to enforce, then I don't think it makes sense to require us, A, to bring everything to the floor and have the procedural motion about it every year, and also then B, risk that there's some weird exception that pops up. Let's adopt a clear rule. Let's provide a clear mechanism. And so it seems to me it's instructions to the committee that make things easier and better for the convention, not promising 1,200 floor fights over the next 5 years. That seems to be really a step towards making the convention unworkable and less trustworthy and more divided over doctrine, not more unified. So I asked folks I know they're supporting Josh Powell this week to help me understand what this accomplishes in the step towards doctrinal unity, and I didn't get back an answer I thought helped me think it was any better. So I think it would be a mistake, but obviously there is somebody somewhere that thinks it would be a good idea. I just don't see how it helps people that have real concerns about doctrinal unity in the convention.
Thanks, David. Now that John has given us that,
Yeah. So I think
because here actually would be real quick. So it's like the top line that I would give, and I said this the other day, and I don't know if I've used this phrase before, but I think it's true. Like I think the egalitarianism in the SBC is the biggest theological crisis we've faced since the conservative resurgence, because it is fundamentally, it's a theological crisis. It's like, do we believe the Bible says this about the church and pastors, or do we believe it says this, or will we make room for both? Will we allow our confession of faith, our statement of faith, to be so obviously flaunted? I mean, we talk about this, and Jonathan Lehman has an article back on this in the day where it's like, once you go down this route, then you bring in affirmations of homosexuality and all sorts of other things. And I think we've been flirting with the idea that we can somehow avoid going down the slippery slope into full-blown theological liberalism without dealing with the egalitarian issue. So I just wanted to say that and then tee it over to you, David, is that I really think this is like the biggest theological crisis we face in the SBC in 30 to 40 years. And we have to solve it, or it will solve itself for us.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And closely associated with that is, I think, just a crisis of courage or a crisis of clarity. And that is to be able to speak these things. I think everybody who believes the Baptist faith and message, they know this to be true, but they're unable to speak it clearly. This comes out in the mini docu that came out from Moscow as well, addressing women. Right? We saw that there were leaders who are unwilling to be able to stand against Rachel Den Hollander. And I think there's a concern that there would be upset women in some of these places. Or even if you go back to J.D. Greer, his argument against the law amendment was because it would be offending churches that are from different cultures. And that's actually part of the conversation that Willie had with Willie Rice that will come out next week for some of those reasons. And so there are a number of adjacent issues there, but it's certainly a massive issue. And what would be most helpful is to have a credentials committee that can do the work of the convention, so it doesn't have to be on the floor of the convention every single year, and they would actually be doing the will of the convention. That would be simply clearly stating what the Baptist Faith and Message has, and then to apply that to the churches that are in friendly cooperation. And so I think if there's any positive to what Josh Powell is saying, is that the credentials committee has not served us well. But the problem is because of the people who are on that committee. That's the whole reason why Mike Law did what he said, was to be able to give them directions so that committee would actually function properly. And so we need to have the right people on that committee. They need to have the right mission, and then they need to have the clarity of their convictions and courage of their convictions to stand against those churches that would want to thwart that and to say, look, you can go be Methodist elsewhere. That's fine. But in the SBC, this is what we hold to, as we always have in the Baptist Faith and Message.
Yeah, that's well said. I mean, I think that, the credentials committee told us they didn't know what a pastor was. And, and I guess we tried to avoid having to tell them what a pastor is. And then we tried to tell them what a pastor is. And now we're just going to get rid of that.
Well, and the confusion of all of that was the woman who said that was also preaching in the church that was disfellowshipped in Louisville, Kentucky, too.
Yeah, right.
So
right. The thing that we're promised doesn't happen to SBC happens a staggering number of times,
Right.
which is that there are women pastors and women preaching. And, you can, if you want that, you can find that in other denominations. It's not supposed to be in ours. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I would say, go ahead, John.
Well, I mean, I just, I know the convention is not a church. And so you can only stretch these analogies so far, but imagine, your elders stood up and said, we're really tired of doing the discipline thing. We're going to have votes at business meeting now, and we're not going to get involved. You say, well, that I appreciate your confidence in the business meeting process, but, and I like rambunctious business meetings, but it seems to me the healthiest way for this to happen is for if there's obvious and gross sin, then the elders can deal with that in a way that's redemptive, as opposed to having floor trials in front of 10,000 people that have been, don't know the facts. That just ultimately, if it cleans up an org chart, it just doesn't make things better. And I, even if it's more complex, I do want to make things better in the convention. And so the standing committee, it seems unavoidable in an era when people would like to use Southern Baptist money but not hold Southern Baptist beliefs. That's what we're guarding against. And so I just think that function's unavoidable.
Yeah, I mean, it's like maybe 20 years ago, we didn't need it. We clearly need it now. They certainly thought we needed it on issues of, so-called racism in our churches and issues of abuse in our churches. And yet, when it came to defending what is so clearly in our statement of faith about pastors, everybody balked. It's like this is far clearer. I mean, in some of the cases we've seen brought to the convention floor the last few years on the racial issues or even on the abuse issues, it's like they're way less clear cut. And we're then acting as this 10,000 person jury on these cases. And so, it just seems obvious. And also the way this works too is if the credentials committee was functioning as it's supposed to, and these churches are being referred, and then the credentials committee says, hey, you're not in friendly cooperation because you're not, operating according to our statement of faith. Maybe a lot of those churches just say, okay, you're right. You got us. And we don't want to be a Southern Baptist anymore either. So like, hopefully the idea would be like a lot of, many of them would just say, okay, we're out. And then that kind of really narrows down how many have to come to the floor. You remove that mechanism and then they all have to come to the floor. And I got to say too, I have zero confidence, at least in how the Southern Baptist Convention annual meetings have been run that I've been to, that we would give enough time to deal with this at, each committee meeting. So, all right, guys, thank you for joining. Appreciate it. So David, why don't you again, just tell our listeners where they can find what you guys are doing at Christ Overall and what's left to come here. We're about 2/3 of the way through the month. Do we have any big bombs dropping in these last 10 days here?
We do. Yeah. So ChristOverall.com is where all of that can be found. We also have a podcast that is there. So certainly our conversation with Willie Rice will be an important one. I have an article coming out next week that's kind of tying some of these things together. And we'll be really looking at what it will take for trust to go forward. And my concern that I will articulate in that is that we have Southern Baptist in name only. And that is churches that they lose trust in the convention. They do not disassociate from the convention. They just stop participating in the convention. And this is especially true for conservative churches. So I know of a church that I was a part of in the 1980s and 90s. That was something that they did. And so I'll tell that story a little bit and kind of offer a caution there and what some of the leaders need to do to regain some of that trust. That's one thing. And then Doug Ponder, who's always good for a spicy article, he has one on how the SBC has been longhoused. And so he's going to address the issue of high capacity female leaders in the SBC and in local churches. So you won't want to miss that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for your work on that, David. And John, we didn't get to your article. We'll come back to it. It really, I was reading through it. It's kind of a heady article, right? It's like it's kind of in the weeds, but right. I mean, it is, but it's really, really.
I won't take that personally.
Well, no, it's not an insult. But I mean, it is. It's like as I always try to do. It's like how can I put this in really basic terms? It's like the trustee system is the foundation of the Southern Baptist Convention cooperative efforts, and if the trustee system is failing, our whole system is failing. Yeah. And that's essentially your argument in that article. and what would it look like to recover that. So I put all the links into the show notes. So we'll get you back on the hook to talk through that more next time, John. So,
sounds good. See you next
guys,
week.
thank you, and we'll talk to you soon. As always, appreciate your patience. These are really important conversations. Can't always get them under an hour. This one went a little bit longer. But these are incredible brothers, David, John, Michael, Rhett, and the individuals that they represent in the Southern Baptist Convention are local pastors doing the work of the Southern Baptist Convention in their local communities. John is obviously an attorney, but he's served as a trustee at the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. So you should listen to what these guys have to say, even if you don't agree with everything they have to say. They're smart, they're gifted, they're empowered by the same Holy Spirit we trust is all across the Southern Baptist Convention, even on different sides of these debates. So please do make sure to check out Christ Over All and everything that they're doing this month related to fighting for reform in the Southern Baptist Convention. And we hopefully will be ratcheting up our engagement on these issues too as we head towards June. As always, if you would like to help support us in that work and in our ministry, you can do so online with a tax-deductible donation at centerforbaptistleadership.org. And please stay tuned as we'll continue to have these conversations as we head towards June. And please make the time to come to the annual meeting. If you're not there, it doesn't matter how much you listen to any of this or read any articles or hope for a better SBC. If you're not there to vote, if you don't send your messengers, it won't matter. And this is a major problem in the Southern Baptist Convention. Only about 1 out of 10 churches in the SBC send messengers to the annual meeting. Let's maybe tick that up to 2 out of 10 this year. I think if we did that, we could see some really major changes for the good of the SBC going forward. So folks, thanks for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe and share this with all of your friends, with your pastors, with your association. And we'll see you guys next time.
The Center for Baptist Leadership Podcast is powered by American Reformer, hosted by William Wolfe, with audio production by Jared Cummings. Our music is a custom remix of Soldiers of Christ in Truth Arrayed, the official hymn of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. To help CBL reform and revitalize Christian institutions, please consider making a generous donation today at centerforbaptistleadership.org.